Continued, page number 47. Influence of the spirit of discovery and adventure. The influence of the spirit of discovery and adventure runs through the literature of Elizabethan age and even after that. During the Renaissance, imagination and action went hand in hand. In Shakespearean England, ocean became the highway of national progress and adventure. Frobisher, Forbisher, Raleigh, Raleigh, Drake and Hawkins discovered and conquered new lands and expanded the geographical space of England. We may trace everywhere in Elizabethan literature the impression made by the wonders told by sailors and captains who explored from the North Pole to the southern seas. The voyagers themselves wrote down the accounts of their adventures. Hakluyt's voyages and discoveries and Purchas's pilgrimage were very popular. The voyagers, in the words of Mair, Mair, are the makers of our modern English prose and some of its noblest passages. They were pioneers in the field of writing plain, unadorned English prose and the plain and direct telling of a stirring story. The spirit of adventure caught from the voyagers got its fullest and finest expression in drama. Walter Raleigh writes, "Without the voyagers, Marlowe is inconceivable. His imagination in all his plays, especially in Tamburlaine and Dr. Faustus, is preoccupied with the lust of adventure and the wealth and power adventure brings. In Shakespeare's Tempest and Pericles, the terror of the storm and the shipwreck, with all its dramatic poignancy, pervades. The Merchant of Venice, Othello, the Twelfth Night, and the Tempest testify to the powerful influence of the spirit of discovery and adventure. The influence of voyagers and of discoveries persisted long after the first bloom of Renaissance had flowered and withered. Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and many other works show the influence of the spirit of adventures, especially that of Purchas's pilgrimage. The influence of classical learning. The revival of classical learning influenced the content, style and technique of literature. Plato and Aristotle exercised immense influence on literature. The doctrines of Plato's Symposium influenced Spencer's Hymn to Intellectual Beauty and Republic, encouraged new ways of thinking and inspired More's Utopia and Bacon's New Atlantis. Mayer remarks, "The reading of the ancient awakened new delight in the melody and beauty of language. Men became intoxicated with words. The poets and writers of this period experimented with language and invented new modes of expression. Various poetic genres," writes Legge, "in which the ancients and the moderns had one distinction: pastorals, epics, comedies, tragedies, lyrics of every kind, every kind of prose, romances, criticism, history, philosophy were skillfully and successfully attempted." Influence of the spirit of rational and scientific quest. The Renaissance also fostered the spirit of questioning, of rational and scientific quest for truth. Make an appeal to the reason of man became the ideal of many writers. Bacon is the high priest of this attitude. The spirit of national enquiry is the main characteristic of Bacon's New Atlantis, the advancement of learning, essays and the plays of Ben Jonson. The age of Renaissance makes the real beginning of a high order of literature. The enrichment of English language due to various factors remarkably contributed to the development of literature. The literature of this period is romantic in spirit. Edward Albert remarks, "The romantic quest is for the remote, the wonderful and the beautiful." All these desires were abundantly fed during the Elizabethan age, which is our first and greatest romantic epoch. Reformation and its influence on literature. Both Renaissance and Reformation began to be effective at about the same time in England. Reformation, a movement which had for its objects the emancipation of the conscience from the church. End of page 47, now page 48. The emancipation of conscience from the church began in Germany. Luther initiated it in 1517 when he attacked the power of the church and the pope. With the passage of time, Reformation produced a moral reaction against the worldly spirit of Renaissance, but in the long run it ushered into an era of religious liberty and freedom of thought. The struggle for the emancipation of conscience from priestly control had begun in England nearly 2 centuries before with Wycliffe. The spirit, strengthened by the example of German and Swiss reformers, was the moral force behind King Henry VIII's historic declaration of renouncing the sovereignty of the Pope and declaring himself the head of the English Church in 1534. English became the language of religious offices in place of Latin. The message of the Reformation went through the country in the sermons of Latimer in 1549, who was the most powerful and effective preacher of the day. His message, written in straightforward, racy, simple and homespun prose, appealed to Englishmen. During the short reign of Edward VI, English Reformation moved closer to the Protestantism of the continent. Edward's sister Mary vainly tried to re-establish Catholicism in England. After her death, Queen Elizabeth sealed and ratified the Protestant victory. During her glorious reign, the authority of the Roman was again replaced by the English Church. A general atmosphere of individualism and self-reliance reinforced the proposition that man was directly responsible to his God without the mediation of the temporal hierarchy, and that he was entitled to have the Bible in his own tongue. The Reformation was a continental movement. Both Renaissance and Reformation were basically a rejection of authority and tradition in the favor of individual initiative and authority. Hudson writes, "While the Renaissance aroused the intellect and the aesthetics faculties, the Reformation awakened the spiritual nature. The same printing press which diffused the knowledge of the classics put the English Bible into the hands of the people, and the spread of an interest in religion was inevitably accompanied by a deepening of moral earnestness. Reformation may be briefly explained as the religious movement arising out of the revolt of Martin Luther against Pope's supremacy and the consequent establishment of a new Reformed Church founded upon scriptural authority. The consequences produced by a conjunction of the Renaissance and Reformation resulted in the growth of a new spirit of rationalism, repudiation of pan-European papal authority, the growth and the development of English language, and ultimately the growth and development of Puritanism. Puritanism, Puritanism. The Reformation influenced contemporary literature. The Authorized Version of the Bible 1611 and William Tyndale's translation of the New Testament 1527. The two important works embodying the spirit of English Reformation left imperishable mark on the evolution of English language and literature. These works also exercised great influence on the development of English prose style. Moody and Lovett remark, the Reformation and controversies, religious and political, which grew out of it, gave occasion for what we should call journalism in the form of pamphlets, serious and satirical in both prose and verse. The great English writers of this period, Spencer, Johnson, Milton, and Bunyan, are the true children of both the Renaissance and Reformation. Poetry. The poetry of this period, which mirrors the spirit of the age, is conspicuous for the spirit of the conquest and self-glorification, humanism, vigorous imagination, originality, emotional depth, passionate intensity, sublimity, vividity, and variety. Sir Thomas Wyatt, 1503 to 1542, and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, 1516 to 1547. It is not Survey, but it is Surrey, Surrey. Wyatt and Surrey, widely travelled in Italy, brought to England the Italian and classical influence. They are the first harbingers of Renaissance and first modern poets in England. The book that contains their poems is Songs and Sonnets, known as Tottle's Miscellany, 1557. MIS-CELLANTY. Wyatt brought to English poetry grace, harmony, and nobility. He attempted a great variety of metrical forms, songs, sonnets, madrigals, and elegies. He first of all introduced sonnet in England. He strictly followed the Petrarchan form of sonnet. Wyatt also introduced personal or autobiographical note in his poetry. His lyrics are noticeable for rare simplicity, spontaneity, melody of the medieval minstrels, and the courtly grace and refinement of a man of learning and culture. He also introduced into English the Italian terza rima and ottava rima. End of page 48.